Chapter 2, Day 144. It had been 144 days since the EMP went off, and 130 days since we last visited the group at the church. It was now the beginning of April. There is still a considerable amount of snow on the ground, and we have all weathered the winter. Between our food stores and hunting, we had plenty of food to get us to this point without a problem. We have a system for harvesting snow into water and boiling creek water for drinking and cooking. We also have rainwater harvesting systems in place to use as the warmer weather approaches. We had built a small greenhouse and were planting our starters in there for the past week or so. During our prepping, we had accumulated a large amount of heirloom seeds and were looking forward to some fresh fruits and vegetables. While trying to find members and friends of the church who were surviving in the area, we did pick up several more people to join our group. Things were looking up. We had survived the brutal winter. We had food and water, and the days were starting to get longer and warmer. We were in good spirits. We thanked the Lord every day for prospering us so well. In the past 4 months, since the security force troops had pulled out of the school, we haven't seen or heard from them. One of the small trading posts got word that the government was concentrating all its efforts in the larger urban areas that were out of control with riots, looting, and senseless violence everywhere. People were killing each other for a can of tuna fish or a gallon of water. Up here in the hills and in the outlying areas, we were pretty much being left alone, for the time being anyway. Word got to us that the city 30 miles to the south, which was the closest real city with 100,000 plus people, was in complete chaos. The military had been called in and martial law was declared to quell the unrest. There were 3 very small trading posts set up within a 20-mile radius from where we were, as well as the larger post down in the town a few miles away. It was set up in an old warehouse that had long been abandoned with the railroad. Each trading post had a community bulletin board, and people could post notices, both private and public. In this way began a rudimentary system of communicating with neighboring towns and people. Zeb Fairley worked as a courier for this system. He woke every day at 4:30 and rode to the larger trading post on the railroad tracks. The town it was in had some 45,000 people before the EMP attack. He would pick up notices meant for the other 3 smaller posts and deliver them. He rode almost non-stop, only dismounting long enough to run in and collect the messages and get back on his horse. He could usually run the entire circuit, which is about 28 miles, and be back home by noon. Then he began his workday. For providing this service, he earned credits to use in trade at each of the posts. A group of engineers and fabricators had worked together with an old railroad museum down the line by the shore to restore 2 old steam locomotives. They had enlisted workers to repair and rebuild the miles of tracks that ran north to south throughout the state. This was a daunting task. Earlier last month, they had run one of the locomotives for 30 miles between 2 towns to the south. Today, Zeb learned at the larger trading post downtown that they were almost finished with the section of track that ran the 30 miles up from the city to the town where the trading post was located. This would greatly increase the traffic of goods and allow the messenger service to expand its area as well. It would also greatly increase the risk of trouble riding the rails into town. A double-edged sword indeed. But overall, it was positive progress. The Fairleys were thriving in this new society. They had little problem adjusting to the off-grid lifestyle, as they had been mostly self-sufficient to begin with. Losing electricity and the flow of goods and services proved to be only a minor inconvenience for them. Now that money was no longer useful and everything was barter, they were adjusting easily. They brought eggs and fresh milk down to the trading posts and earned credits for them. They also delivered on request fresh meat that they butchered and processed on their farm. With spring coming, they had a large garden planned and would soon be providing fresh produce as well. Zach Fairley, who loved animals and was really good with horses, started to breed his family's stock. He had already delivered 2 fine young colts to market. Carl had considered horse breeding before the EMP attack, but never thought the potential earnings justified the effort and risk involved. Now, with very few vehicles on the road and gasoline at a premium, that all changed. When Zach approached him with the idea, Carl gave him his blessing and threw his support firmly behind the idea. In a society where money means nothing, the Fairleys were emerging as a powerful force, rich in wealth that did not include monetary concerns. Carl and his family were all hard workers. They honored and glorified God in how they conducted their business and in all that they did. God was blessing them for this with great increase. When Zeb rode to the warehouse trading post the following morning, he found a small group of military troops working there. They were fortifying it with wire fences and large blast walls all around. The building entrance and windows were shrouded in sandbag walls. It looked more like a bunker you would see in a war zone than it did a trading post in town. Zeb went in to grab the notices and asked the shopkeeper what it was all about. He explained that with the arrival of the train service, the government was getting involved, providing security to the post. He told Zeb that, starting with the train's arrival, everyone would have to check their firearms at the gate if they wanted to be allowed inside. He assured them that this was for security reasons only. Zeb grimaced, grabbed the message bag, and started to walk out. The clerk stopped him and handed him an envelope. He said, "This is from the lieutenant in charge of the post security detail. It's for your dad." Zeb looked at him puzzled. "What do they want with Dad?" he asked. The clerk shrugged his shoulders. "Don't know. I didn't see the message. I was just asked to get it to him." Zeb nodded and walked out and rode off. Back at the homestead, he delivered the message to Carl. It was a short note, simply asking Carl to meet with the lieutenant. It listed his office hours at the post and asked Carl to stop by any time during those hours at his convenience. Carl folded the note back up and slid it back into the envelope. He tucked it away in his coat pocket. He seemed concerned. Back at the church, things were progressing normally. Everyone was working, getting ready for spring. We had 2 young foals that we traded from Zach Fairley for a .30-30 Winchester, 400 rounds of ammo, and the promise of a share of the upcoming season's produce harvest. We had a solid friendship with the Fairleys, as they were members of our church. We trusted them to be fair in their dealings, and they trusted us in the same way. This allowed the deal to go very easily. We were not sure what and how much produce we would get the first year. Zach trusted us to work with him until both parties agreed that the produce share had been satisfied. The foals were a male and a female, so Pastor told Zach if for some unforeseen reason the garden was a failure, that he would have the option to breed the female with one of his stallions and claim the offspring as payment. Zach countered that offer by requesting the right to breed the mare, even if the garden was a success, for some future consideration. Pastor agreed. The 2 men shook hands, sealing their deal. Pastor was in the corral watering the horses when an old military jeep pulled into the driveway, stopping at the blockade. 3 men stepped out and started walking up the driveway. Steve, who was in the tower, whistled, and Richie and Greg emerged from the parsonage garage. Pastor walked down to greet them. Myself and Frank were chopping wood and stopped and walked over to the pavilion steps, rifles in hand. Steve gave 3 short pounds on the bell in the tower, and the rest of our guys came outside and went to their assigned defensive posts. Pastor, Richie, and Greg met the men halfway up the driveway. The man leading the group was Major Daniel Stillman. He extended his hand to Pastor as he introduced himself. Pastor introduced himself as well, shaking hands with Major Stillman. He asked if they could have a word in private. Pastor asked Greg and Richie to remain in the parsonage garage with the two junior officers, as he and the Major went upstairs to talk. Pastor led the Major up to the living room where they sat in front of a wood stove. Pastor offered a hot beverage, and the two men sat talking, sipping strong coffee. "What brings you all the way out here, Major?" Pastor inquired. Major Stillman explained the upcoming arrival of the trains to the nearby town and how things in the region would be changing. Stabilizing, he hoped. Things were pretty bad not too far away in the larger cities, and he wanted to make sure that didn't spread out with the railway service expansions. "And how can I help with that?" Pastor asked. "I'm glad you asked, Pastor Sharps," the Major said, managing a slight chuckle. "The military command feels that to restore some normalcy to the region, we must establish a government hierarchy of some form. Most larger, centralized areas remain under martial law. In these more rural outlying areas, we believe less government may be a better approach." Pastor interrupted. "I have always believed that, Major. I also believe that if that were the case, this nation may not be in the predicament we are in today." "I understand that, Pastor Sharps, I really do. However, in an attempt to move forward from where we are now, we do need some government controls in place. Believe me, if you have seen what I see every day just 30 miles to the south, you might agree. People are killing each other over nothing. It has to stop, Pastor Sharps. It's my assignment to make it stop." "Major, I'm sure your explanation of how you believe I can help will be forthcoming." Yes, I'm sorry, Pastor. We are setting up a regional board of governors, a group of local leaders to set policy and outline procedures to move into this uncertain time, this new normal, if you will. We want you to fill one of a dozen or so seats on this board." "Well, Major," Pastor said, "in America, I remember we would elect people to fill those seats." "You must remember the concept of democracy." "Yes," interjected the Major. "Ben Franklin said it best. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch." "Yes," said Pastor, "but finish Mr. Franklin's quote, please. He asserted that liberty was a well-armed lamb contesting the vote." "Well," said the Major, "we do have plans to elect those positions at some point. This would only be interim until that could happen. We don't have a solid timeline yet, but I'm thinking sometime in the fall, possibly. The bottom line, Pastor, I know how you feel about all this. I think that many out here feel the same way. I think you represent the morals and lifestyles of the people living out here. I think you would represent them well. You certainly have your opinions of how the government should function and what level of control it should assert. Well, this is your chance to build a platform for your beliefs and ideals. To make the government be what you think it should be. You won't be alone. You'll represent one seat out of 10 or 12. Going forward, if you decide, you can throw your hat in the ring for a permanent spot, or just give it over to somebody else. The choice will be yours." "Can I sleep on it?" Pastor asked. "Yes, of course," the Major responded. "We don't have a lot of time to waste, but certainly take a few days." "I'll have an answer for you tomorrow, Major." The two men shook hands again, and the Major left.